in describing a model that makes room for what is essentially a symbiotic coaching relationship. I'm wondering if you then can elaborate more on managing up and how embracing this could sort of like help management lead more effectively across generations.
Yeah, I think when we think about managing up and looking at our managers as humans, I think that over time, and especially when you first, when I think about when I first entered the workforce, I thought about leaders as these like super tenured, like numb people that just like make decisions and they're very authoritative, but they have feelings too, right? And they have blind spots as well. And I think when you think about managing up, it should really be a symbiotic partnership and it should be progressive, right? And so when you're first entering the workforce, you should be focused on contributing to your organization. And those contributions should be both within scope and out of scope, depending on how much equity you want to create within that environment. But over the course of time, it is progressive in nature and you are building consensus with your leader to the point where that relationship is really just formulated amongst recommendations and influence, etc. And so I think when I think about managing up, it really is a process of allowing my leader to see what their blind spots are, being the pulse of the floor, understanding that we have positional power, right? You may not have the title of a manager, but as you're building that positional power amongst your peers, in 3 years of being on my HR technology team, I've quickly become the senior person. With 6 people leaving and going to other employers and 6 brand new people coming in, I am the most seasoned tenured benefits configurator on my team, right? And so over the course of 3 years, I've seen how my positional power has grown, and I'm able to take that information back up to my manager and say, hey, this is working, this isn't, making recommendations to really allow for productivity and efficiency to really be impactful within the organization. But I think looking at your leader as someone who you potentially want to be, and we can look at the converse, right? We all know those managers or leaders that have a lot of areas of opportunity, and what we try to say in those particular circumstances is that we want to emulate the opposite of maybe the negative things that are happening for that, right? But I think if you are building consensus and building that partnership with your leader, you can have that 360-degree approach of feedback, and it shouldn't be a problem, right? And so, yeah, I don't know if anyone else has anything to say, but I think managing up is really a process that's developed over the course of time.
I like to promote an aspect of learning. I mean, I'm constantly learning. I'll just sit and listen. I like to work the room with my eyes and listen and absorb. And I kind of try to foster that among our group of employees, because there are people that have been in positions for a long time, and then there's people coming into the workforce. The only thing, and like a lot of things in business, it's great on paper, but in practice it sometimes doesn't work. The one thing that I've noticed with that and trying to foster that sort of thing is the younger generation. They tend to be of the opinion that if I scream and yell the loudest and throw a tantrum, I'm going to get what I want. And I'm not going to get into societal issues because none of us in this room are going to conquer those problems. But that seems to be the way that the younger generation, I'm going to say, under 25, try to get what they want. They yell and scream, they throw paint on paintings, and they get what they want. So that's the problem that I've seen in the delivery. An older manager or more seasoned manager will listen if the delivery is appropriate, not just screaming the loudest to get what you want. And it has to be a back and forth, because then nobody wins in that situation. So yeah, I love it. I love the idea of seasoned managers learning from new people. I mean, a quick story. I had one of the people I hired for front desk, and she said, and it's actually kind of funny that you assume that the younger generation knows how to use Microsoft Office, Word, Excel. And then you think about it, no, they really don't. They don't use computers. They use phones, but they don't use computers. So I said to this one person, I said, make sure you save your documents. And she said, I clicked the little vending machine, right? And I'm like, what are you talking about? The vending machine. So I went to her computer. I says, what vending machine is on your computer? She said, look. So the icon for save on Windows, if you know, is a disk, right? The old floppy disk. And it looks like a vending machine if you look at it. So, so that day I learned something, and I said, yes, click the vending machine. So it's just an example of how we, we're learning all the time.
Perfect. Yeah, I was definitely going to want to pause and see if we had any questions for the room before I continue. So please.
Yeah, I would love to ask a question, and I really appreciate the concept of this morning and perspective. Thank you. Oh, okay. So thank you is what I want to say. The question I have is, talking about work-life balance. The work we do has changed a lot. So think about just being on computers. It's exhausting. Screen time, all of that. But my question is more around the type of work we do. So some of us work before computers, work on our desk, maybe, right?
Yes.
Okay, so one of the things I hear quite often is that the work we have has changed, so it's more knowledge work, right? So it requires a different level of engagement and, presenteeism in terms of the work that's being done. So my question for you is, I'd be very curious, how would you define the difference in the work we do that may warrant someone taking half a day to reflect and rest because of the brain power? So any perspective you could share on how you define the type of work, knowledge work we're doing as it relates to all this, I'd love to know that.
I mean, I know I can start just with even with my work as an attorney. Sometimes for me, a lot of it comes down to trying to nudge and encourage supervising attorneys to get things to me as quick as they could and sort of help them understand that the way that you may do it may be an hour, but it may take me 4. And that the reason why you may have jumped to me first was you like how I do it, and the way that I do it requires a system that again takes me 4 hours. So and I share that to say that it's understanding, again, as Eric even pointed out, it's managing the person, not people, and trying to figure out, well, what does that person need to get the best work out of them? Hammering with many deadlines, that everything's a priority. You can kind of sense, and I think if you work with someone, when that person is a little flustered, maybe that's a time to say, all right, shoot, I do have a meeting in 10 minutes, maybe, but this person is a little, hey, let's chat in an hour. Let me know what's on your plate. Let's see what we can figure out. And I think that's helpful. I know for me at this stage, as I'm starting to get more autonomy with the work and getting a lot more coming in, that guidance on how to navigate that is important, because otherwise I get the work done, the work's good, but I'm very sour in the attitude. So I'm just like, whew, I was just railroaded. This was not fun. This is not, they just such a, thank you for the good job. And I think if we remember that piece of people first, you have them, you encourage them to do good work, but then you help them have perspective about why the work was needed at that time, what value that work had, and then helping them figure out how to work that into their schedule in a way that they, just don't feel railroaded. And that's pretty much a feeling that I know very well, that I think management needs to do a better job with sort of understanding that per person, if that makes sense from my perspectives.
So there's this really random video that I've come across with. It's about what's your why, and it's a comedian, and he presents, there's this he finds in the audience this gentleman who is a music teacher, and he asks him to sing Amazing Grace, and he sings Amazing Grace, and he of course sings it beautifully. But then he says to him, okay, but now I'm going to give you why you're singing it. And so then he tells him about, his uncle who got out of jail and this and that, and he gives him a story behind it, right? And then he's like, now sing that version. and it's a very different version. And I'm saying that because I do think that it's really, really relevant and similar to what you're saying. Like, you know, the purpose, the vision, the mission, the what's your why is actually really important. So you say people first, I say it's all about relationships. Those are pretty much, you know, two sides of the same coin, right? And so, you know, I like to think about what's your why. I like to think about what's your purpose. I like to think about the relationship of it, getting to know your employees individually, and tapping into their innovation. Like I do part of our new hire orientation, and I love the opportunity to share with our staff, you know, my history, and that I've had the opportunity to grow professionally at Clifford Beers, but also like what I've learned from our newest employees. So during COVID, I'll give you an example. One of my staff said to me, so there was an uptick in shootings in the community during COVID. And so she said that she was driving through the community and she noticed a vigil and like a gathering. And she parked her car, felt compelled to park her car and get out and realized there were no mental health providers around. I'm a trauma clinician. I responded at Sandy Hook a decade ago. Like, this is our area of expertise. We know how to support communities that are healing. We weren't there. And she said to us, we should be there. We should do better. One thing led to another. We now have a community healing and support team, and we do outreach into the community when events happen. That came from one of our home visitors who wasn't that long at the clinic. It didn't come from me, and I responded to multiple community crises in my life, and I didn't think about that outreach component. So again, encouraging innovation, because that's where then the change can happen. And then now I think about that employee who's like leading that effort. I also have to take care of that employee, right? Think about her work-life balance, think about her self-care, what she's doing to manage that. But those are just, that's the way, you know, the senior leader I was still sitting in my house. I wasn't driving through the community on that day.
Mm-hmm. So I think when I think about work-life balance and kind of folding in, managing up, et cetera, and competence-based roles. I had a particular circumstance like 2-3 weeks ago with a new manager on the team, previously worked in this environment by myself, kind of on an island throughout COVID. And she came on the team, and I realized that she came from a union environment where she had to manage people more in a micromanaging fashion, down to hours per day. I had a particular week where at the end of the month, a lot of my QAs and configuration design is due in terms of deadlines. And I said, hey, I tried to advocate for self and said, hey, I'm on the Salesforce queue this week. Can I switch with someone else type of thing? Kind of just telling her. She then came back with a valuation of like what my week looked like. Down to like 0.5 hours and the valuation of all my tasks for that day. And so emotionally, I was triggered because I was like, I've been doing this work for 3 years with no guidance. How is this valuation being created? The valuation also didn't take into account meetings. So it was right at 37.5 hours. If you add the 6 hours worth of meetings for the week, I was at over 43. And then we talk about task switching, right? The 15 minutes that it takes for you to look at the directions, right? We have instructional design. So we look at the directions of things to remind ourselves, how do we design this or configure this in Workday or what have you? So I come back to her, I take like an hour or so to kind of cool down and really gather my thoughts about how to advocate for self when we think about what this workday looks like and sitting behind a computer for what will be 10 hours a day for that particular week. And I came back and said, hey, so this is what I'm going to do. I am going to trade off with my particular schedule for some other tasks, and I'm going to give you the true valuation of the work that I have to do for this week. After that conversation, I think she felt sort of silly because I think she did realize that she was managing myself as she was managing her previous union team. She did have to realize that she was on a salary team now. And that conversation looked different week by week. And what we sort of saw, and so this is the other piece, tell your manager when they're doing well, right? When things are working well, right? A lot of the times, the things that they're dealing with as leaders are multiple partnerships throughout, like for example, in this space, the university, those can be difficult relationships and difficult to move the needle. She cried. She cried 3 weeks later when I said, "You are doing a phenomenal job. I thank you for taking my advice and not being micromanaging in that way, because I don't think anyone on our team would appreciate it." And what this schedule looks like now is kind of being in line with conversations that I had with my previous director, as she is newer to the team. So I try to fold that all in with work-life balance and competence-based jobs, etc., as well as managing up in a way that folks can appreciate.
Thank you. I think we have time for one more question if the room has one. So seeing none, I want to get someone to just quickly speak about giving feedback. Do you find there to be a difference in the type and frequency of the feedback that you give to your employees, either across generations, that you find to be a little bit more effective? Because I think that's important. Quickly, I'll share as a relatively younger attorney, and from talking to some more seasoned attorneys, younger attorneys, we like to hear feedback a little more frequent. So we have an annual review process, and I remember talking to my peers when I first joined the firm. A whole year? We have to wait a whole year to find out if you don't like how I use, a particular syntax or the Oxford comma. Like, I need to know this sooner because I can fix it sooner. Whereas more seasoned attorneys, the year annual review kind of maybe works better for them. So I wanted to know if your impressions on giving feedback and how's it most effective.
I'm happy to. So we definitely have an annual review process, but that's the written process. And I guess that's the thing that I want to say about that. We also have a new employee process, their first 120 days. So when you're a new employee and we've oriented you and begun to train you up, we then do, we call it a probationary review, which we should probably change the name of, but that's what it's called. We'll just leave it at that. Now I'm thinking we definitely should change the name of that, now that I've said it out loud. So, but our annual review and our probationary review, I hope that there's no surprises in that. So there should be regular feedback, regular communication. I said already that we meet one-to-one a lot with our staff. So I have always believed, and I've been a supervisor and a senior leader now for a number of years at Clifford Beers, if in fact there is a surprise in that written document, I have not done my job appropriately. And so I really view, and people avoid conflict and avoid the hard conversations, like again, I get that. But there should never be a surprise in a review process, if it's annually, if it's every 6 months, and whatnot. But I think, again, the importance of checking in with staff, even if that's not your typical workplace culture, I would encourage you to maybe reconsider that and to just think about the benefit of checking in with it, like how I'm doing as a supervisor. If I haven't communicated it, then shame on me, right? So in general, feedback should be routine and absolutely a collaborative process.
And just for the record, I'm a big believer in the Oxford comma. As far as reviews go, in my organizations, I do, and I have the office. I try to structure a hierarchical system where there's, I don't like to say chain of command, but there's an office manager, and so we do a 90-day review, and I do it in two parts. It's a self-review and then the manager's review, and then they do them independently and then compare the results. And then there's an annual, a 1-year review. But those are the formalities, the written ones that go into the personnel file. There's constant reviews that are going on, and that's why I encourage the communication among and between and even the peers, even somebody on a lateral level. Too, we get into those conversations, and before we end up and we break up and leave here, if I'm available. If anybody wants to shoot me an email anytime and bounce something off of me, or we can talk about it, certainly by all means, shoot me an email, because that's how I learn too. I just love hearing what other people are doing and helping solve problems.
I think when we reference performance management, that's the process or cadence throughout the year, coaching, etc. And the cadence should be different for someone who's relatively new to the organization as they are assimilating. When I talk to my students about what this process looks like from a theoretical approach, I really try to merge practice of my experience at Verizon and or at Yale. And so at Verizon, a very corporate-driven environment, there was a cadence. You're given your performance document at the beginning of the year. You know what your expectations and metrics are. You also know the value of your contribution, right? So that really aligns you with the mission of the particular organization. Throughout the year, you're having a bi-weekly coachings or weekly coachings, depending on what you need. This is real life. There are those employees that are developing. So you may need to spend a little more time with those types of employees that need a little bit more practice or a little bit more approach of learning and development, etc. But what I really enjoy at Yale is the reflective approach that we utilize every single year, where we actually sit down and we not only think about all the projects and contributions that we're a part of for the particular year, but also what are our aspirations and where is it that we want to go. And you're really thoughtfully bringing this to that conversation at your performance appraisal conversation, which is the sign off of the document, you generally get your merit information, all that jazz. But what I try to tell my students is if you could be king for a day if you're entering a management level position, try to marry the two. Right? Try to have the reflective approach of really trying to solicit what your employees really want out of their role and trying to combine the two. For some organizations, the work is going to be the work, and there'll be a little that you can do to have the individual working out of their scope. But really trying to create that balance of trying to create that cadence and or merging to what the employee really needs for the performance management process, which differs from the appraisal.
Well, thank you. Thank you all very much for your time and joining us. Appreciate it. Thank you.